Okay, so today we'll be talking about the virtualization, the commercial bundles, the product sets that it'll cover, how to collect data on the license keys, and understanding the virtual machine affinity. If you've got any questions throughout the session, please feel free to ask. We'll also look at some questions towards the end as well, or ask some questions towards the end. With that, I think we'll pass over to Pete and get started.
Hi there, Peter Rowe from FlexNet. Today we're going to talk around virtualization, some general issues that we have come up against and people experience, and also then how that affects or how the tool can then solve some of those problems and some of those issues. So we're going to look at, as I say, sort of the general issue around virtualization first of all, and then we'll drill down into specifics, you know, perhaps in a sort of quite a Microsoft-centric environment with things like AppV, and then also some Oracle, VMware, and just general virtualization stuff as well. So I guess we start off in the, you know, traditionally in the good old days, before we had virtualization, licensing was, you know, relatively straightforward, okay? Because if a user wanted an application, they generally had a desktop, you know, sat on their desk. If they wanted a piece of software, then pretty much, you know, they'd go and get a CD, they'd install it, yeah, and they potentially install the license key that was written on the side of that box, and you had, you know, a paper license effectively that said, well, you're allowed 10 of those sort of thing, and you knew where those 10 people sat, you knew which ones you'd installed. You could manage that in a, you know, fairly easy way, okay? The issue we then have okay. However, in an increasingly virtual world, okay, we now have a situation where users are accessing applications through a complex infrastructure and a very complex architecture, okay? So we have users with laptops, perhaps remotely, that are accessing via Citrix, via something like Edge Site, that's talking to a virtual desktop via, you know, Zen Desktop and Zen App, and then potentially as well, sometimes those applications aren't even installed on those desktops themselves. They're then streamed inside those desktops by something like Microsoft AppV as well. Okay, and at the same time, you've got users that are also potentially accessing other applications, you know, either via Oracle VM, and they may be Oracle applications, or they may just be other applications hosted on, you know, a separate virtual infrastructure as well. And then you've got other users with their own devices, you know, going through the same thing. So that access is controlled by Active Directory. That decides, you know, which desktops they're allowed to access and which applications they're allowed to access. So it becomes increasingly difficult to actually basically solve a number of problems, okay? And they are, you know, the inventory. So which applications do you have? Where are they installed? And how are they installed? And then also the access to them as well. So how do we manage the licenses that say, okay, well, these particular users are only allowed to access this particular application on these particular servers? And then also in terms of measuring your usage and recording and monitoring your ROI for all of this, you know, complex virtualization infrastructure and all of these applications that you've put out there, how do we actually then track the usage and measure the usage as well? And then in terms of the actual virtualization technologies, so things like VMware and Citrix to a degree as well, a lot of those applications themselves, if you like, if you're trying to monitor and manage the licensing on those, then there are particular issues with that as well around, you know, bundling of tools and capabilities, and then also the use of license keys as well, and how we can actually track license keys and make sure that, for example, for VMware, that you're not overutilizing particular license keys, or if you have applied limited time frame licenses, you know, test licenses or evaluation licenses, then to make sure that they haven't expired and then not using those and you're not in breach of those. And then overall, there is a significant issue with any virtualization technology of the applications you deploy within it, okay, will then have certain conditions associated with them okay, about how you can use them within that virtual environment. So being able to actually understand your virtual environment in terms of how it's clustered, if you have clustering of virtual machines against host machines, okay, how it's partitioned, okay, so basically how those virtual machines actually share the resources on that host machine, okay, and we'll cover off some of the differences between hard partitioning and soft partitioning, for example, in a sort of Oracle VM environment, but that can be critical to your cost of your license at any true-up as well, because it's significantly different and the license terms are significantly different, and there is a massive difference in cost of that as well. And similarly as well with what we call virtual machine affinity. Again, so can you move virtual machines around, or are they locked down to their host machine, or can you share them? Okay. Again, if you look at the end user license agreements for a lot of your applications, there will be specific terms about whether you can host them in a virtual machine and then how far you can share that virtual machine, okay? And if you get it wrong, it can cost you significantly as well, okay? Because effectively, if you give someone a virtual machine, it's effectively, in terms of the license, it can be considered almost piracy, because you're basically giving someone a copy of an application or a version of that application, and they don't have a license at all for that as well, okay? So these are some of the things we're going to cover across, and look at how we can actually around that as well, because obviously what we're looking at is that in many cases virtualization has been put forward to reduce the cost of the organization, okay? Because you don't need a huge data center, you don't need lots of hardware sat around, you don't need lots of power, air conditioning, you don't need a team of people managing all of this infrastructure, this physical infrastructure. Okay, you can condense everything down to a few servers and host everything on there as well. So from a transformation point of view, the business is often keen to sign up to a virtualization project because, if you like, the costs stack up. It's like, okay, well, we can save ourselves, these many millions of dollars, over a certain time frame. And what doesn't get considered is often by virtualizing the environment, you're at risk of increased costs for your software because the vendors will charge you more for putting software in a virtual environment. You're increasing your audit risk and your exposure to audit because it's harder to track the usage and it's harder to track, if you like, the complexities of that as well. And as a result, you may even increase your operational costs because you may have saved money in infrastructure, but you may actually then have increased your costs in terms of software asset management, okay? Because of the efforts to manage the license position, and also potentially the difficulties in measuring the ROI for that deployed software as well. So you no longer have an easy way of saying, okay, which users have used this, who's used it, how frequently, am I actually getting value out of deploying this in a virtual environment? So those are some of the things we're going to come across, and we have come across in a number of projects, and the tool allows us to actually deliver solutions for that as well. So we can look at some of the specifics of virtualization, really around a typical virtualized environment we've seen in a number of organizations, and then we're going to drill down and look at some of the specifics around VMware and how FlexNet Management Suite can deliver solutions against VMware, and also Oracle virtualization as well. But we potentially will cover off any of the other things as well. Okay. So here's a typical virtual use case that we see in a number of organizations. Okay. And the use case really is, for example, in this case, how do I manage and monitor my infrastructure to, we'll take MSDN as an example, but to really ensure that only allocated individuals have access to particular applications in my development environment, given that my development environment is in a very virtualized infrastructure that involves all of those applications and technologies there as well. Okay, so we have MSDN-based developers, okay, that are assigned into Active Directory groups that are then accessing systems via Citrix, Citrix XenApp and XenDesktop, and then those applications are streamed into those desktops via AppV, okay? And a client would want to say, okay, well, how do, one, I make sure that these users are the correct users, because I have 3,000 people in my organization. I want to make sure that only the development team has access to those, at least under their development licenses. Otherwise, we get switched to a different license and different terms and conditions. But also, given that these licenses are expensive and given these applications are expensive, how do I show the usage of those applications. Okay, so how can I show that we're actually getting value out of deploying in this way, and how do I show which of those applications we're using and which ones we aren't? Okay. So in terms of the infrastructure, okay, wait for the slide to load. Okay. So this is largely what it looks like. Okay, so we have FlexNet Management Suite sat there. Okay, and we have the development environment that has Citrix and Citrix Edge sites, basically managing the overall brokering of the virtualized environment. And then we have Citrix Zen Desktop and Citrix Zen App, System Center with AppV streaming, or AppV inside System Center, and then streaming applications into that as well. Okay, and now what I'd like to do is show you basically, for those of you not so familiar with a virtual environment, what each of those individual components actually does. Okay, so in this case, Citrix Edge Sites tracks the usage of the application by a user on a computer. Okay, that's fundamentally what we do, or what that does, okay, and why it's required in that system as well. Okay. Then Zen App actually records that user's access to an application. So you can see how we basically have to go through that environment and utilize various different components, because one component will not give us all of the information we necessarily need. Okay. And then Zen Desktop actually associates the end user and the end device, if you like, with the actual desktop itself. So that gives us information about how which desktops the users actually accessed as well. Okay. And then AppV gives us the actual usage, and again associates the application which is being streamed into the desktop with the actual desktop template and the end user device as well. Okay. So there's a number of systems that we need to pull in here, as well as, if you like, the actual license compliance position from the MSDN licenses, okay, and also the information from Active Directory, because in this case, Active Directory is what decides which desktops, which environments the users are actually allowed to, and which licenses potentially as well, because we put that into allocations and restrictions within FlexNet Management Suite, those users are allowed to do. Okay, so we'd obviously import the entitlements, okay, and that gives us the MSDN licenses effectively. We would obviously import the users and the Active Directory enterprise groups as well into FlexNet Management Suite. And so that gives us the entitlements and the users and the groups as well. We then need to use the connection from, and we're talking FNMS 2015 here, okay, but effectively we would then need to connect via the beacon with 2015, or directly into the Citrix Edge site. Okay, so that's a standard connection, and that would give us the usage. Okay. We'd also then to build the connection to Zen App. Okay, again to do the association, and then also into Zen Desktop as well. Okay, so we need to pull those connections in there as well, so that we have 3 potential connections so far, just to give us that level of information. So it's not a straightforward inventory, where I connect to SCCM and I basically cross-reference that against, AD or whatever, all the users in there as well. Okay, so it becomes slightly more complex. Okay, and then also we need to put a connect to AppV. Okay, because that cross-references the information in SCCM and also the Active Directory information as well. To actually give us that, and potentially if we then want to monitor the usage of those applications, okay, and this is the key in a virtual environment, we need to put some sort of monitoring agent, i.e. a Flex agent or something else, inside the actual virtual desktop template itself. Okay, so if you think of the virtual desktop template as a machine that you want to inventory, okay, then in your gold build, if you like, you need to have an agent in there so that whenever anybody fires up that template, you're actually recording the usage for that and it's reporting back as well. Okay, so that's another consideration.
So will that give the level of detail as to what applications are being used? So like a SQL, SharePoint, which is really important for assigning your MSDN licenses, because depending on what type of Visual Studio and MSDN license you have, it depends on which applications that you're allowed to have. So by getting this information, you can then identify what level of membership you need, and that can have significant cost implications as well.
You'd also look at, for example, in a for particular vendors, so they will license on access, okay? So they would potentially look at that environment and say, well, you've got 3,000 employees, okay, and they all have access to, potentially have access to this virtual environment. You're going to require 3,000 licenses for whatever you have hosted in there as well. So from an audit point of view, to be able to defend against that, then you need to actually be able to prove that that is locked down in terms of, say, Active Directory groups, and then be able to show usage reports and say, well, it is only this group that is allocated these licenses and only has access to this, and here's a report that validates that as well. And also, as part of an organisation, if you are conscious that that may not be the case, then this also allows you to see the usage of people from the non-allocated groups. Okay, so you can see where there's leakage, and you can deal with that before the vendor picks that up potentially as well. So it can, it's a process improvement thing as well around security of your, if you like, your Active Directory, your enterprise groups, and your control of your virtual environment as well, so that you know it's not a free-for-all before the vendor finds out that it potentially is. Now, what I'd also point out is, while we're on the subject of audits and things, in many cases, vendors aren't able even, in a complex environment like this, to actually successfully audit, the environment. So they may well put a blanket, cost in place, or, effectively just say, well, we think you owe us this. So again, there is opportunity in being able to get this right and being able to deploy these tools to actually have a real serious argument and say, well, no, actually, we believe this is the case, because we've had situations where effectively vendors have audited an organisation and 3 months later just walked away and said, well, actually, it's too difficult, we either won't audit you or, charge you, or we think this is the cost, and then the client's been able to say, well, actually, no, we think this is the cost and you can't prove otherwise, so that's what we think we're going to pay. So there's real opportunity in here because of the complexity on both sides. Any questions on this before we move forward? I say, so, it's pretty complex, and there's a lot to it, sort of thing. So, but hopefully, I guess that's the point, really. There's opportunity for savings here, and there's also opportunity to inform IT before they make some quite costly decisions, potentially around licensing, that, there's more to virtualization than just getting rid of, tin in a data center sort of thing. There are serious implications for licensing and access and all of that sort of stuff as well. So from a SAM point of view, it allows us to have those conversations. Okay. So, for those of you familiar with FNMS 2015, this is just showing you a quick screenshot, really. If you can see it on the screen, because the print is quite small. But really, you get the standard report, if you like, about the usage and everything else in terms of the user. But you also get the computer name as the endpoint, if you like, and also the access mode as well. So we can now start seeing if a user has actually accessed it via Zen Desktop or via their local machine, okay? We can see from the computer name, the endpoint, if they came in using a Citrix app on their Apple, on their iPad or something along those lines, okay? So we get that endpoint recorded from something like EdgeSite, and that allows us to actually then track that usage all the way through as well, okay? So that's just an example. And obviously we could, you've got the standard reporting and the custom reporting that you can then break that down and sort that how you want, okay? So we're going to look at some specifics around VMware. Okay. Now, within FlexNet Management Suite 2015, or from 2014, release 3 onwards, there was a specific VMware blade. Okay. So this is less concerned, if you like, about the technology that's being run within inside VMware. Okay, because that's sort of the standard inventory we just talked about, and this is the specifics about how am I licensed for VMware. Okay. And to ensure that in this rush to get to virtualization, we're not just deploying lots of virtual machines, we're not just deploying lots of hosts and servers and things to support this, that potentially are putting us in a compliance risk for VMware itself as well. So there is some functionality within the blade that actually looks at some of the key problems around a VMware. One of which is obviously the discovery in the inventory of your VMware environment, okay? One of the key points with VMware is the assigning of license keys and the assigning of license key capacity. So you are allowed, for a given server with an allocated license key, a certain number of virtual machines or a certain number of whatever it might be. And being able to actually track that and monitor that is obviously a key component as well. Yeah. Also tracking. So if you have 5 license keys, actually making sure that you've only deployed those onto 5 servers and that you haven't deployed the same license key on additional servers, so just tracking that and managing that within your environment as well. And then moving forward as well, functionality that's coming is basically being able to unpick the VMware bundling, okay, because as with many vendors, VMware, bundles its products, and depending on how you bought those products and which bundle you bought, the licensing terms and conditions are slightly different. Okay, so being able to unpick those and actually allocate the right licensing to the right product within the right bundle is obviously key, and that's something, again, the FlexEra toolset can help you with. Okay. So some of the technologies you'll come across with VMware, so, to listen out for sort of thing, if you think, your organization is moving towards VMware or has a VMware, is things like vSphere, vCenter, and the ESX servers. Okay, so you may see those in your environment. When you do an inventory, you may see, even without the VMware blade, you'll see ESX servers coming back as well. So that's an indication that you've got VMware deployed. Okay, and really what that gives you is basically your server virtualization environment. So that's what manages the server virtualization as well. Okay. And then for VMware as well, you have a series of desktop and app virtualization technologies, which are really VMware Horizon, and then ThinApp as well. So ThinApp is your app virtualization sat within the virtual environment, the virtual desktops as well. Okay, so those are some of the products that you'll hear, and obviously some of the bundles that you'll pick out. And then there are a series of licensing models as well. And again, within the VMware blade, and obviously this is effectively the VMware Pearl. Okay, so you have these licensing models held in there. So you have either physical, so the number of devices, or potentially the number of virtual desktops that you have associated with that, the virtual endpoints as well. You'll have processor obviously on the servers as well. And then you may have named user or concurrent users for those environments as well. So a number of licenses depending on the sorts of solution you've got. So as you can see there, for vCenter, vSphere, it's device or processor based, and for the desktop you've got per endpoint, per user, concurrent user, or per named user as well. Okay, so and you may have a mix and match of those. Okay. There are also considerations around restrictions on the license as well, in terms of basically wherever you purchase the license, then generally that's where the license has to be used. Okay, and obviously this is a key consideration in a virtual environment, because if you set up a virtual environment in Europe, but you have broad access for your organisation, then unless you have those controls, unless you can prove those controls, then potentially anybody in the world could have access to that system and effectively put you in breach. So you really need to understand what structure is in place and potentially be able to prove to the vendor when they come in and do a true up and audit that you have those restrictions in place and be able to prove that as well. Okay. One of the other considerations as well, especially with the bundling, is that effectively, and we can assist this with the tool, is that whatever bundles you have, okay, and they will all have different support levels when you purchase them, effectively you will have to have the top level support across all of them. Okay, so basically VMware force you to sort of upscale everything to the highest level of support. And again, so being able to actually track that and manage that depending on the bundles is obviously a key consideration in that as well, for upgrades and whatever else as well. Okay. And as we talked about, so in terms of being able to do this, obviously we collect the standard hardware inventory data and the number of processors to actually allow us to map against the license. but then also within the tool we can actually query the additional information around the actual addition that we've got, and also the license keys that are allocated to that machine and the license capacity of those machines as well. So we have a bit more functionality than just a straightforward inventory, okay, because from vCenter we can actually then read the actual license keys for each of those vCenter instances as well, okay. And what that will give us, so what we talk about here is then on top of that, and we'll come back to this perhaps with Oracle as well, is whatever you license within that VMware solution, as we've talked around, and effectively how you've set up that VM licensing basically will affect how your other products that are hosted in that will be licensed as well. So the fact in this VMware example, we're able to move the VM across the cluster, okay? Effectively, if you've got IBM PVU hosted in there as well, okay, then they will charge you, if you like, the high watermark, okay, they'll always charge you for the 50 PVUs, okay, because that's the maximum, if you like, that's available within that cluster, okay, regardless of the fact that potentially you've only got it hosted on a 40 PVU machine, but if it has access to another 10, cores or whatever it might be, then potentially you're exposing yourself to being licensed at a higher level here as well, okay. So we'll talk, when we come into Oracle VM, we've got some specifics about partitioning and how that works, but it's applicable to any of these virtual environments. So again, from a software asset management and a license optimization point of view, you will probably need to have a discussion with your virtualization team about the technologies they've employed to actually build their virtual environments and how they've actually constructed that virtual environment, okay, and understand how the partitions work, how the VMs, if the VMs are allowed to be moved, okay, and cross-reference that with your license agreement to make sure it's compliant, okay. Now, obviously, the tool can do that, and will highlight, if you like, those, against the product use rights if you aren't, but going forward, sort of thing, it's an area of understanding that, is generally lacking in organisations. And as I say, we've had examples of organisations that have virtualised based on, say, a business case of saving themselves $1 million a year, and have then been hit with a $2 million true-up cost because they weren't virtualised in the correct way according to that, So it does happen, and it's quite common.
Pete, one of the key issues, I guess, that people have when they're managing their VMware licensing can be the bundle, and making sure, if you do buy a bundle, obviously you can't split that bundle across multiple services and so forth. So how does the VMware Blade actually work in identifying that?
It's scheduled for a future release, so currently we will be basically similar to the other sort of bundles and suite functionality that we have within the tool. We'll be able to basically associate the bundles, you'll basically be able to actually work out if you've got a bundled tool or, if you've got a standalone tool. But that's actually a future thing at the moment, sort of thing, so, but that will be coming.
We have to manage separately the vCenter.
At the moment, you basically have to sort of know, how you've applied or what you bought effectively, against the license as well, but we don't really have being able to wrap up the bundles and then apply that directly to the license currently. That will be coming in a future release this year.
Does anyone else have any questions about how the new VMware Blade works, or what it has in addition to just the standard functionality in the product? Okay.
One more question. Are there any limitations to the versions that it can support? Because I suppose that's two different stories. That's yes or no. About whether we can support, vCenter 4, or we can support, vCenter 4, vCenter 5.1, or 5.6.
I'll check specifically. I think there may be, as in some cases, I think across generally it's from 4 upwards, but I think there are some specifics in terms of the technology and the operating system it's then deployed on, which I think is where the where the issue has come in, sort of thing. So I can look into that certainly and try and get a more definitive statement. But I know, as you say, and I've seen that as well, sort of thing. People saying, "Oh, we support from 4 upwards or whatever." And other people saying, "Well, we can't see 4.6." But I think that has then come about as terms of the underlying OS that's been deployed on and the patch level and things like that sort of thing. So.
Okay, so we'll get the response to that and put that on the LinkedIn group. Thanks, Steve.
Okay. So this with the VMware Blade, again from FNMS 2015, you can see or hopefully you can see in a second, there you go. You can see that you now have a VM inventory report, effectively, that will show you the application, where it's installed, and obviously the processes and the vCenter server, and where it's actually managed by as well, in terms of the vCenter. What I couldn't show, because I can do a screenshot with the little tooltips as well, is if you look under the license key, you can see the alerts on there. And those alerts now indicate if the license key itself for that particular server and application has expired. Will also show if you are over capacity, so you're actually, overused it in terms of the terms and conditions of that license, and also if it's whether it's a permanent license or whether it's a test evaluation license as well, and again whether it's expired or not. Okay, so basically, sorry.
Whether it's underutilized.
Yeah, exactly. It will give you the capacity on that as well. Yeah, exactly. So that's what those little the little speech bubbles with the one in are, but I couldn't find a way of capturing the tooltip that shows you that for the screenshot.
And that comes with the Blade.
That's with the Blade. Yeah, yeah. It's basically the most noticeable, if you like, report that comes with the Blade sort of thing that you can jump on straight away. But then obviously you've got all the recognition and the license model behind that as well. Okay. Now we're going to talk about Oracle and Oracle VM, effectively, and also the impact it has on the applications, again, hosted within the environment as well. Okay. So within virtualization, and particularly Oracle, we have this concept of soft partitioning and hard partitioning. Okay. And that's really around the limits and the flexibility you have in terms of swapping resources for a running virtual environment. Okay, so effectively, soft partitioning is defined really as effectively, if you deploy an Oracle VM on those machines or those environments, okay, it's basically that sort of structure. Okay, and effectively the OS limits the number of CPUs where the software is running. Okay. So that's really the free-for-all sort of thing. So unless you set an explicit limit somewhere, in that OS, or it starts maxing out and the OS starts maxing out in terms of its resource management, effectively, as you use a virtual environment in that, basically it will just keep sucking up resource from the machine, okay, to deliver what it needs to do, okay. Obviously, effectively, an organisation, and as we say, IBM would then come along and say, okay, well, you've got, however many cores and processors on that machine, and you haven't set any limits on it, so effectively, we're going to charge you the maximum for that, for your licensing, PVUs or whatever it might be on that machine as well, okay, which is going to be expensive if you've got it on, a very large machine. So there is also the concept of hard partitioning, okay, and that effectively segments physically, if you can do that in a virtual environment, okay? So that each virtual environment, each virtual machine has an allocated number of CPUs, cores, set of resources, and it cannot go beyond that. So it is, typically like a standard machine. But, if it has one processor and it maxes out, then it slows down and that's it. It doesn't then swap onto something else, okay? And the definitions there, basically, of hard partitioning are in there as well, okay? So obviously that allows you to effectively contain your license exposure and license risk by saying, okay, well, I know for a fact that this Oracle database or whatever only has access to the maximum number of this, and that's within the terms of our license, and it can't go beyond that, and that's what I know my position is as well. Okay, so again, we can, from the product use rights, from the the license models, we can pick that up from within FlexNet Management Suite as well. But again, it's a conversation potentially that you will need to have if your organisation is moving to a virtual environment, about how they partition and to make sure that they partition in the right way so that you don't, have a huge cost implication potentially as well.
So when you're talking about this, what's required in order to be able to identify what's going on here? Is it
effectively, so if you deploy on those environments, say, either of those environments, then you need to make sure, so for example, if you decide that you're going to limit the cost, there are reasons obviously for being soft partitioned, but there's obviously a cost implication of that as well, okay? So what you need to basically understand is are we building our virtual environment in Solaris, are we using Solaris zones for all of these applications we're deploying in there? So you just need to ask that question around that depending, how are we actually storing those. So if you see any of those phrases coming up, and perhaps if you see any of those phrases, the soft partitioning ones, you need to perhaps raise a bit of a red flag and say, are you sure you understand the implications of this if you're putting all of our SQL Server or all of our Oracle into, what effectively is a soft partition? Okay, because so it's really just around having those conversations now.
So do you need the Oracle blade to be able to identify soft partitioning versus hard partitioning, or is that part of?
You don't necessarily need the Oracle to identify it. You obviously need the Oracle blade to give you the license position against it. But if you like, you can have the conversation. Because you won't necessarily know, depends on the environment, you won't necessarily know. You may actually pick up things like LPAR and DLPAR, you'll see those in the reports, depending on the environment. So you may actually be able to see that you've actually got a hard partition or a soft partition.
It's a little bit different times of the day, you'll see the numbers change to the usage of the server. Yeah.
So I don't think you necessarily need to have, because obviously it doesn't just apply to Oracle, it's effectively anything. So in terms of the environment, you may see some of this information in there, but again, it's just a conversation you potentially need, you can have, and just saying, well, how are we partitioned, and then understand how that potentially affects the organisation in terms of exposure.
Typically has the biggest impact, I think, with Oracle license.
Yeah. And then we've just got really, this is just really explaining that in some sense, and what it can actually do for your licensing. So I think this is just a little example in terms of, the number of CPUs and whatever else is in there. And this comes up in a second.
Yeah. We've just switched slides here, and it's just taking its time to load into your view.
Yeah. 3 seconds time, isn't it? Okay, I'll talk through it and we'll see if it appears. But on slide 25, when it eventually catches up, what we have is effectively the example of a soft partition example and a hard partition, okay? So in the soft partition, we'll have 2 processors, 4 cores, and in that case, obviously times a 0.5 factor in the Oracle points table, that will basically give us a score of 4, okay? Whereas if for the same environment, okay, which is hard partitioned, obviously we've limited it just to the 2 cores, okay, rather than the maximum of that on that machine of 4 cores, okay? So you can see there that obviously times 0.5 gives us a result of 1, okay? So, at a very, high crash level, effectively, soft partitioning in that case has cost you 4 times as much, as physically hard partitioning that environment, and that's the sort of, level of savings that you can get. And as you can see, if you make a mistake, or your IT organisation, infrastructure people make a mistake, or just don't consider this, then that's a significant blowout on the cost, And as I say, we have seen that because there's been no conversation between the infrastructure team building the environment and the licensing team in terms of, what's that actually going to do. Yeah. And again, the other thing is around, the other thing is around actual virtual machine affinity. Okay, so again, actually being able to move virtual machines between hosts, and again, vendors are very, very hot on basically clamping down on this. And if you allow this movement too freely, again, it can cost you significantly as well. Because effectively, they're saying, well, you bought one copy, you bought one version of the application. However, you're sharing it across all of these machines, you're giving all of these people access, you're using all of the additional processing power to actually get benefit out of that as well. So again, being able to actually lock down that, or make sure that it's locked down, because again, if you don't, then all of those machines in that cluster will have to be licensed for that particular application, because they'll say, well, you can basically deploy it on any of those as well, and you can potentially deploy it twice, So one, being able to prove and show that you've got the affinity locked down, okay, and also then being able to show the usage and the user access to that as well is going to be key in defending yourself against the vendors as well. Okay? And also from the tool, actually being able to pick up, if machines are moving, so that you can actually clamp down on it. Because obviously the virtualization vendors, if you like, are selling this as a benefit, because effectively being able to do this, there's huge benefit to to people. However, from a licensing point of view, it's a huge cost.
It can be a huge cost, but if you're prepared for it and you manage it carefully, then it's okay. But it is a matter of ideally the IT teams talking about the licensing implications up front, or we've had a bit of chuckles here, or I guess identifying that risk early on, so you can have a discussion about how to resolve it rather than waiting for an audit or some other type of event to cause a panic attack.
Okay, so we're talking around some of the things that you might see within the tool. So in some cases, this is Oracle. So you'd actually see the LPAR, the partitions based in there as well, and whether it's a shared pool and whatever else. So you get that level of information, as well as all the other standard information around usage and everything else. Okay, so we can see that information in there as well. Okay, and that's pretty much it, at least at a very high level of some of the issues and also some of the capabilities that we have, if you like, within the tool to actually assist you in that as well. So if there are any questions, happy to take those now. I think my email address is on the invite anyway, or if anybody's got specific questions, or we can put it through the user group, however you'd like to do it.
Does anybody have any questions at this point in time?
What information that you've just presented to us is available under version 9?
Effectively everything except the VMware blade itself. Okay, which is really around the licensing of VMware as an application rather than the applications inside VMware. So all of the functionality, all of the inventory functionality is available.
So you get license key information?
You don't get license key because that's part of the VMware blade.
Right.
Yeah. But if you like everything that's...
Did you just say that the VM blade's not available for version 9?
No, it's only available from 2014 release 3 onwards.
Okay, thanks.
So you may have seen and heard a number of times that sometimes we'll say FNMP, sometimes we'll say FNMS. From version 2014 onwards, the product's called FNMS, so we just kind of use them interchangeably a little bit at the moment. But from 2014 onwards, it just means that it is identified as FNMS, but it means that there is an on-premise version and a cloud version. So they're pretty much at parity. Both products are fully supported and intend to be fully supported for, forever, I guess, this day. Haven't heard anything different. So, yeah.
It actually brings us quite nicely to the next topic, though. We had a question to the user group a couple of weeks ago with regards to end of life and support for the product. So I might hand over to Alex here.
Sure.
So there's a bit of confusion, people saying that we only support ongoing support for the cloud version, which is not correct. So the new version, so 2014 to 2015, is a cloud and on-premise solution. And traditionally, we will have product enhancements for the last two releases. So, for example, 9.2 will go end of standard life cycle end of this year. And so when it does, it will get no more new features. There won't be any enhancement requests for that. So from then on, it'll be just the latest two versions, which will be 2014 and 2015. That doesn't mean you won't get support. You'll still be supported. There just won't be product enhancements to those products, to the older products. And that's sort of a standard way we work. So as we go forward, 2016 comes out, 2014 or whatever, the older the one is will sort of drop back a bit. And then they go into sort of limited life cycle, and then they go right into the extended life cycle. So they can be around for a fair while. You can see there we still supporting at the moment, up until the middle of the year, still supporting 8.2.3, which is a very old release. There's too many people on that one. But there probably is one or two people out there still with that solution. So that's sort of how it works and how it sort of drops back. So if you want to sort of understand where they are, whether they want to need to start thinking about an upgrade at some stage and start planning for that. Big concern at the moment has been going from the older console-based solutions, so 9.2 and before, up to the new web GUI interface. So we are working on ways around that. At the moment, it does involve services, so it involves a little bit of work to do it. So we take an extraction from the old system, bring it into the new system. So they are working on a way around that. So hopefully later this year, I haven't got a confirmed time frame yet, but hopefully later this year we'll have a solution for that, an easy way of people be able to do that without spending weeks on services to do it. So that's sort of where we're at the moment. There's always been a bit of a stumbling block because we changed the way the product's set up. The functionality is, in 9.2.3 is almost exactly the same as what you'll get in the latest version, other than some of the Blade add-ons, so like the VMware Blade, obviously you can't get. So other than that, the functionality is almost identical. So it's just a matter of working out how we upgrade down the track.
So if anybody does want to have a conversation around upgrading, what that means and things like that, then I'm sure Alex would be happy to have that.
So it does vary a bit from customer to customer. So some customers we've had the discussion with, and it's a fairly short engagement of services. There's not a lot to it, and especially if they've got the capacity to stand up a new server in conjunction with the old server and do an extraction out of it and import it into the other system. So it depends how complex the system is and how it's set up. As we all know, it's different for every customer. So it's something we can look at, but I mean, on average, at the moment, the few I've done is sort of between the 5 and 10 days worth of service to get that done.
Which actually brings us into the next topic for today. So
can just ask, can you post that onto LinkedIn?
Yes.
Yep, so we can actually go on.
Sure.
Thanks.
So we've talked about the future topics a little bit, and one of the topics that was brought up was another roadmap session. I wonder if it might be something that we could look at for the next user group meeting, given that there has been a significant number of clients that are on this call and part of this user group are on 9.2 and below, and potentially given the life cycle and so forth, looking at upgrading over the next 12 to 18 months. So critical to that decision may be one, what needs to be migrated from existing system, custom attributes and things that you've got on your system, but also what functionality you would be looking for in the future releases. Now, whilst the functionality is very similar, there's an extra blade, there has been some improvements. There's obviously constant improvements, but there's things like the with IBM, with the VMware Blade and so forth that people are really looking forward to. There's also the ability to identify CAL usage or count CAL usage, and that's forthcoming. So I think it might be worth actually having the roadmap session so we can understand what functionality is coming out in the various releases so people can identify when it is likely to be most beneficial for their individual organisation to look at upgrading.
Yeah, I'm trying to find out in the meantime sort of where we're at with a better way of upgrading. So hopefully that's coming to us as well. We'll talk a bit about that.
Does that sound reasonable? Would people be interested in doing some nods around the table on the call? Are people interested in doing a roadmap session?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm going to go with a nod. Thank you. All right, well, we might do that for the next session. I'd also like, if you could go away and have a bit of a think about what other sessions you'd like, and perhaps post them either to the user group or to me directly. We can put together the next list of areas. One of the ones that we've got up there is the IBM licensing. I thought we might hold off on that one for just a little bit later in the year, given that there are some enhancements that are happening in the product, just so we can identify once again how things are currently managed in the product and how they're going to be managed in the future. Okay, now the last thing is the ITAM training. The group has spoken about this a little bit. There's been 2 sessions now held locally. The first session TMG actually had a couple of people that attended, and Stuart attended as well. Did you want to give it?
Yeah, that's it's a worthwhile course. It goes through the basics and foundation of how you manage hardware assets and software assets, all the things to take into consideration. Goes through things like contract terms to watch out for, licensing terms to watch out for. It's pretty full on, intensive, a lot of study, because if you're going to sit the exam, you want to sit the exam while it's fresh, and it's a 4-hour but open book. Sorry, not a 4 hour, 3 hours. 3-hour open book. It depends on who you do it through, actually. If you do it directly through ITAM and you do it at 2 o'clock in the morning, the exams you get longer, because they're saying anything out of North America is non-English speaking. Well, English is not their first language. So you actually get an extra time. so just bear that in mind when you consider it, but the course costs are the same. So whether you do it locally, the crowd that we used was the guys running out of New Zealand, out of Auckland, and they do it to suit Australian time. So it's actually quite convenient during the day. Starts at 9 in the morning.
So that